We finished up last time with a 100 Years' War. The one battle, I don't remember, there actually was several, but the one battle I remember for that war is the Battle of Crecy. The Battle of Crecy was where both sides were eager for a fight. The knights, particularly on both sides, the French knights just simply went into battle with no planning, no organization. They just simply mounted their horses and galloped into battle with no more of a strategy than just simply saying up and at them, go get them, not much more. But as they galloped into battle, they were met with a hail of arrows shot by English longbowmen and crossbowmen, and these arrows could penetrate shield and armor. And once the knight had fallen off his horse, most of the time he suffocated. And if that weren't enough, a rainstorm happened to come up right just before the charge started, and the horses slipped in the mud. Talk about a horse slipping in the mud. Early in May, I watched American Pharaoh race his second race in rain. If any of you happened to see that race, I kept thinking, it was raining in sheets that day, and all the horses, I kept thinking they're going to slip and one of them's going to break their leg. None of them did, but and I thought, how in the world can they race in these conditions? The mud was just all over the place. And of course, American Pharaoh came out clean. The rest of the riders who were behind got mud all, the riders and horses both got mud all over them. But anyway, but in the case of the Battle of Crecy, though, these horses were carrying men in armor, and they did slip in the mud. And once the knight had fallen, it took several men to pick them up, but most of the time they suffocated in their armor. The Battle of Crecy did a lot to undo armored knights, and it showed the world that armored knights were no longer going to dominate the battlefield. For the first time in many generations, a lot of armored knights were killed. Then came the invention of gunpowder and the cannonball and the rifle, and now armored knights became a thing of the past. But the Battle of Crecy was an English victory, but it was not decisive. All right. Now again, we could spend an entire semester talking about the 100 Years' War, but we won't. Instead, we're going to come to the end of the war right at this point. During at least two times during the course of the 100 Years' War, they went 20 years with no fighting. The French got a king named Charles VI. Charles VI was riding at the head of his army one day when out of the woods, according to folk, let me warn you ahead of time. Part of what I'm going to tell you involves a little bit of, well, a whole lot of witchcraft and a whole lot of supernatural. I'm not going to try to explain what happened. I'm just going to tell the story the way those people told it, the people living at that time told it, and you can decide for yourself what you believe. But here's the story. The way they told it. Some insane man came out of the forest and touched the person of Charles V, and Charles V immediately went insane himself. Charles VI went insane. He killed his most trusted knight who was nearest to him. The rest of his people ganged up on him and finally subdued Charles. And Charles was to remain in and out of insanity for the next 30 years. They called in exorcists, they even called in witches. They called in bishops, they called in priests, they called in doctors. Nothing seemed to help. He was in and out of insanity. And when he was insane, of course, there was no way to tell what he would do. They would lock him up. Then he'd come out of insanity. He once went for a period of 2 years without going insane. They thought he was well, but he went back into it. Now, during the time that he was insane, he made out his will. And in his will, he gave his crown when he died to the King of England. So the English stopped fighting. Now, anyone who knows anything about wills knows that the mental condition of the person making up the will is always in question. Was this person who have a sound mind? Well, after Charles VI had made up the will, to his wife was born a son named Charles VII. But Charles VII never really knew if he was really the son of Charles VI or not. I say Charles VI's wife had a son, and they assumed that Charles VI was the father. To this day, we don't know for sure, except we know that his mother was the queen. All right, that much is established. Who was his father? Well, supposedly his father really was Charles VI. All right, so Charles VII grew up, and when Charles VI died, the people of France said, oh, the will he made out, he was insane when he made up that will. It doesn't matter. So the people of France named Charles VII as their king. Well, the English then began to pour in their armies like crazy, and they overran a third of France. And Charles VII could not even have himself crowned king because he'd have to go to the city of Reims, as his ancestors had done, and he could not get to Reims because the British held Reims. All right. So, Charles VII was an intelligent man, yes, but very, very indecisive. And he was actually his own worst enemy. He could not come to firm decisions, especially since he did not know if he was a real king or not. And of course, the people of France did not respect him because, number one, he hadn't been crowned. Number two, his armies were losing all over the place. All right. At the far end of Charles VI's realm, near Germany, in the town of Domremy, there was a young girl who began praying earnestly, "O Lord, save France." The girl's name was Joan of Arc. Or the French call Joan d'Arc. D'Arc, in other words, of the Arc family. Her father started off in poverty, but worked his way up to where he became moderately wealthy. Well, as Joan of Arc grew up, she began to hear voices. Now, today's doctors would say she was suffering from epilepsy, just like they say Socrates was, because Socrates believed that he was buddy-buddies with a demon. Well, Joan of Arc began to hear voices, and she said these voices came from saints that we no longer think about anymore. St. Catherine, St. Margaret, two saints who had lived 1,000 years before, and Michael the Archangel. These voices told her to go to the King of France, and there she'd be given an army, and that she could defeat the English. Well, all right, so one day she went to the nearest nobleman, the nobleman in charge of her district, Sir Robert Beaumains. The only reason we remember Sir Robert at all is because of Joan. She asked Sir Robert to send her with an armed escort to the King of France. Now, folk, it was not unusual for a young teenage girl to go up to a nobleman and request some favor. I mean, this was normal. I mean, these peasants often went to the nobles and requested favors. Also, it's been learned since that it was not unheard of for women to join the army during the 100 Years' War. A lot of women joined the army, and some of them fought with distinction. But for her to ask that she be given an armed escort and taken to the king to lead an army, she was laughed out of his court. Well, her father gave her a good whipping, and for a while the voices stopped, then the voices resumed. Go to the king, and there you'll be given an army. She went back to Sir Robert, and here's where something is lost to us in history. We do not know how she ever got Sir Robert to listen to her. But somehow or another, she got Sir Robert to listen to her. So Sir Robert sent some of his best troops with her to go to the King of France, who was not living in Paris at the time. Paris was under the control of the English. But to go to the King of France, Charles VII, well, they traveled at night, and then they hid in the daytime to keep the English from finding, because the word got out. There's this young peasant girl, teenage girl, who says that she can save France. The British heard about it, and they determined, well, she's a witch. The people of France became all abuzz. Hey, there's this young peasant girl who says she can save France. People of France became somewhat excited, to say the least. Anyway, now she got near the court of the castle where Charles was staying. One of the guards made fun of her, and she said to him, "You better watch out what you're saying, for your death is near." Within an hour, that guard was dead. I mean, folk, again, I'm giving this to you in raw format. I'm not going to try to explain what happened. Now, the king, when she was about to come into the palace of the king looked around the room and found a servant, a lackey, who was about his size. He said to the lackey, "Hey, you and me step into this adjacent room." And the king and the lackey exchanged clothes. So the lackey came out holding a tray and looking like a servant. I mean, the king came out holding a tray looking like a servant. The lackey, dressed in a royal robe, sat on a throne with a crown on his head and a scepter, which would normally been a crime to impersonate the king, but this time the king had ordered it. And everybody in the court, we're going to make a fool out of this young girl. She's going to do obeisance to the lackey. We're going to make a dunce out of her. Well, Joan entered the room, supposedly having never seen the king before. She ignored the lackey who was sitting on the throne with a crown on his head. She went over to the king, who was dressed in lackey clothes, and she bowed down, and the king was genuinely surprised. Why are you doing obeisance? I'm the lackey. And she said, you're the Dauphin. She would not call him king. She called him Dauphin because he had not been crowned. In French royalty, the Dauphin was the heir apparent to the throne. So she did obeisance to him as the Dauphin, and all the French court could do was applaud. I mean, she had not been made a dunce of. Well, the word got around. Volunteers then began to pour in all over the place to the king's army. And the king had to make a decision. He was indecisive anyway, but he had to make a decision. Well, do I really want to give my army to this peasant girl? And of course he knew, everyone knew, and we know, the only reason he had the army was because of her. She was bringing in volunteers. She was inciting the people of France to fire up, like you might say, supplying the French with what they really needed, just a will to fight, a fire. So the king began to siphon her off to this bishop. You examine her, find out if she's a virgin, find out, whether or not she's a witch. This was a big concern. Well, they questioned her, and of course the questions they asked her and the answers she gave, you can read for yourself. She answered with a whole lot of intelligence. Ultimately, all the bishops could do is say, Your Majesty, it's up to you. We can't make a decision for you. You have to decide for yourself. The king was trying to get someone else to make the decision, but this was one case where he had to decide, did he really want to give this peasant girl his army? Well, he finally gave her his army that he just had recently acquired. Today, no historian can fault him for it. What she had to offer was the one thing that the people of France needed. And that was to be fired up and filled with zeal and filled with a will to fight. Something they had not had until then. She went out. Now, to make a long story short, she won 4 battles. After she had won her 4th battle, the king felt secure enough in his position to have himself crowned. So when the king had himself crowned at Reims, he had, of course, his wife on the one side of him, and then he requested Joan be on the other side of him. There's been some artists paint pictures of the crowning, the coronation of Charles VII, and of course there's Joan. Joan dressed in pale armor that some people called white, but she insisted was silver. But she also dressed in boys' clothes. She was definitely a transvestite. After that, things went downhill really fast for Joan of Arc. She requested that they go and take Paris right away. We got to go to Paris. The king and all of his generals advised against it. No, we've won 4 battles, but now we're not ready to take on Paris yet. Greatly against the advice of the king and the generals, Joan went to Paris anyway. On her way to Paris, she was captured and turned over to the British and tried as a witch. Again, I could spend a good bit of time talking about the questions they asked her, and she would answer the questions with an unusual amount of intelligence. Eventually, while she was in the prison, Charles VI showed no interest at all in saving her, no interest in applying for ransom. The French people seemed to have forgotten about her. The English eventually condemned her as a witch. She was burned at the stake at the age of 21. And no sooner had it happened than some Englishmen cried out, even as they were burning her, "May God help us, we have burned a saint." It's a move the British have regretted from that day till this. Well, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit of the story. 2 years later, Joan's father died, mostly of a broken heart, mourning for his daughter. But Charles VII gave a title of nobility to the D'Arc family. And so that meant Joan's mother was now a noblewoman. 20 years later, Joanne asked the king, Joanne's mother asked the king to have Joanne's case retried. The only way the king could overturn the bishops was to go to the Pope, so the king wrote a letter to the Pope. The Pope of that day overturned all the charges that were made by every cleric who was deceased. But of course, the clerics who were still alive, those charges remained. Well, a few years went by. Most popes are up in years. That pope died. A new pope took over. By this time, all the clerics who had made any charges against Joanne were dead. So the new pope overturned all the charges against Joanne, and Joanne's mother lived long enough to see Joanne restored to the church and declared not guilty of any crime against the church. Fast forward to the year 1920. World War I had just ended, and the Catholic Church felt it needed to do something to increase its popularity, because the church had suffered terrible popularity during World War I. So in 1920, Joan of Arc was made a saint. Her day is, all saints have their own day. Her day is May 30th, the day that we used to celebrate as Memorial Day. There have been movies made of Joan of Arc. There have been a lot of books written about her, and you'll hear about from time to time. In fact, just a few months back, they told of the untimely, they had an article on MSN about the untimely deaths of young people who had died young. Among them Elvis Presley. Joan of Arc was on that list, a person who had made her death while quite young. Alexander the Great also was on that list. Men and women who had met their death young. As to whether or not she was a saint or whether or not she was a witch, officially today the church declares her a saint, and the church officially declares that she probably heard from God. What she might have been, or whether she was just a woman with epileptic seizures or a woman with headaches, each of you can decide for yourself. I discussed the issue with my father a few months before my daddy died. He said he thought that she was a witch. But there is another side of the story. That is that Charles VI here had an illegitimate daughter whom he kept hush-hush. So when the daughter was born, the daughter was Joanne, by the way, he put the daughter at the far corners of his realm where she'd been forgotten about, but she was really the daughter of the king. Illegitimate, of course, but she was really the daughter of the king. And that's why she had so much concern for France, and that explains why she had maybe such intelligence. She was actually an educated young girl, but she was really not the daughter of the D'Arcs. But be that as it may, oh yes, and when the person who was burned to the stake was merely an impostor person who was really a genuine witch, and not Joanne. The real Joanne was married off to someone and lived to be an old woman, but she was told to keep hidden and keep quiet, because her father would not want her existence known. This has come out in the last 20 or so years, well, 30 or so years. Be that as it may, there's a lot of mystery surrounding Joan of Arc, who she was, but the one thing we know that she did, she supplied the French people with a lot of fire. The French were destined to go on and lose war after war after war, and the wars they won, they had to have a lot of help to win. The one exception helped the American colonies win their independence. The French helped the United States get its independence from Britain. That was one exception. Otherwise, they were destined to go on and lose war after war after war. In World War II, their efforts were a big disgrace. In World War I, they only won because they had help from the British and the Americans. World War II, they were knocked off the battlefield after one battle, knocked out of the war after one battle. And it was up to Britain and Russia and the United States to whip Germany. But they have had a terrible time in their wars and since the days of Joan of Arc. All right. Leaving Joan now for a while, we are still in the midst of this war. The Black Death was still going on. There was a struggle between the nobles and the monarchy as to who would be king. Now, if you take second semester world history, you'll find out eventually the kings were able to win and put the nobles down. But during this time, a lot of nobles wanted a weak monarchy, and the monarchs remained weak. And for the power of most kings were weakened, so Europe was run by a whole bunch of nobles. And this was to be the scenario until the 1600s, when some powerful kings took over and put down the nobles and asserted themselves. Now, in the year 1453, the 100 Years' War ended. Now, two things happened. 1453. It has often been called the dividing time between medieval and modern. The 100 Years' War ended. And also the Turks captured Constantinople. In 1453, the ruler's name was Mehmet II. Now, the Turks knew that in order to get Europe, the Turks' plan was to get Europe. They already had part of Spain, and they had to get the Byzantine Empire first. So in 1453, the Byzantine Empire ended. Mehmet II captured Constantinople, but he never felt strong enough to go in and take Vienna. Vienna was next on their list. I'm going to jump ahead of the story just a little bit. This will not be on the test. But in 1580, they went to Vienna. Europe rose up, much of Europe, and drove them out. They came back 100 years later, and in 1680, about 330 years ago, it may seem like a long time to you, but in 330 years ago, the Turks again went to the city of Vienna. Once again, Poland came in, Czechs came in, a lot of Europe sent their armies, and they drove out the Turks. They drove out the Muslims. Then, the technological advancements went all Europe's way, and the Muslim world was left out. To make a long story short, and the Muslim world lagged farther and farther behind. Europe advanced in technology, and the Muslims no longer felt strong enough to capture any more territory. European nations went on to conquer almost every Muslim country and held on to it until after World War II, when they gave them back. And folk, we might be about to be reminded of why it's sometimes necessary to conquer certain kinds of people. They'll come and conquer if you don't. That's the point I tried to make in this semester. Why did our ancestors go and conquer their neighbors? Because their neighbors would come in and steal their children and take them and make slaves out of them. They didn't. It's just simply that simple. We can't imagine living in a world like that, but they did. If you don't conquer them, they'll come in today with their detonation devices, come into your public places and blow themselves up, and you too in the public squares. Europe conquered them. Then after World War II, Europe let them go. Anyway, the Byzantine Empire was no more after 1453. All right, now, there's one other episode I must mention, and then I'll review. Decline of the church. Now, I've had students say, how did the church become so powerful? The next question is, how did the church lose that power? Well, for one thing, when the plagues broke out, the churchmen who should have been there leading the way to comfort the sick, to try to heal the sick, the church would run from the plagues like everyone else. And it's known that these people who had the plague, if someone would just have stayed there and taken care of them, several of them would have recovered. Instead, they were abandoned. And of course, when abandoned, they often starved to death or died of thirst because nobody was around. Everybody was afraid of the plague. But there came a big schism within the church, where the church wound up having 3 popes. Now, I mentioned how that Pope Innocent III could tell the kings of Europe what to do. Well, along came Pope Boniface. Pope Boniface VIII tried to tell King Philip what to do one day. And instead of obeying, King Philip sent his army, his Philip the Fair, Philip the Fair, I've already mentioned him in connection with He built up the power of the king, number one. Number two, he was the one who got rid of the Templars. Well, King Philip the Fair sent his army. Boniface did not expect this at all. Boniface fled Rome, went into hiding, and died a few months later of a broken heart. Primarily broken. He did not expect this at all. And he was, well, the king then, King Philip, moved the papacy from Rome to Avignon, a city in southern France. This has been called the Babylonian captivity. If you recall your story about the Babylonian captivity, the Jews were held for 70 years. When Nebuchadnezzar captured them, the Jews were held for 70 years in Babylon before they were allowed to return. Well, the popes were held for 70 years in Avignon. And for 70 years, the popes operated from Avignon, and the pope became merely a tool of the state. Well, a lot of people in France did not like this arrangement, so after a while, the pope in Avignon died, and the church elected a pope who said, I'm going to move back to Rome. Well, okay. All right, now you have a pope who moved to Rome, but the French said, oh no, the papacy belongs in Avignon, so they elect another pope. So now you have two popes. One pope in Avignon and one pope in Rome. They had two popes now. Well, it got worse. These popes hurled anathemas at each other, hurled curses at each other, and excommunicated each other. And Europe did not really know for sure who was pope. So they decided, well, what we'll do is we'll get together and we'll elect another pope. So a bunch of the council got to be, Europe's princes got together and elected another pope, but the other two would not retire. So now the church had three popes. Well, and this went on for several years, and these three popes were at odds with each other. Finally, the Holy Roman Emperor said to one of the popes, why don't you convene an ecumenical council, since you're pope, convene a council, and whoever you choose as pope, we all promise will accept. So all of Europe's princes promised that whoever you pick, but now I want to notice, folks, it was the church this time who picked the pope, not the state. That's very important, I mean, to maintain the separation of church and state. Anyway, one of the popes called a council. The council deposed all three of the other popes, elected a fourth pope. But this time, all of Europe's nobility sided with a fourth pope, named Martin V. And the Papal Schism, it's called, the Babylonian captivity or Papal Schism. The Papal Schism was over with. Martin V immediately made cardinals of the other three popes, but it turned out all four of them, Martin V, the other three popes, none of them lived long. Most popes are up in years, and most of them did not live very long. The average length of the life of a pope has been about 3 years. That's been true and fairly true until modern times. We have better medicines to keep those men alive a little bit longer. But anyway, the schism damaged the church greatly and damaged the authority of the papacy. Now, this event, folks, made news 2.5 years ago when we had another pope resign. It said it was the first pope who resigned. When Pope Benedict XVI resigned in 2013. It was the first pope that had resigned since the Papal Schism in the 1300s. It had been more than 600 years since the Pope had resigned. Again, the 1300s, this is when this event occurred. With this, folk, we wind up our story about medieval history and European history, and I'll spend the rest of the hour reviewing. Missing a final exam is a no-no. And if you, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. I don't think any of you have any intention of missing, but for those, what I'm saying is being recorded. For those persons who might listen on the camera, on YouTube. Missing a final exam is a no-no. Final exams are not allowed to be made up. Now, if you have an extenuating circumstance, a special case, you need to see us ahead of time. did let two athletes who were on a tennis team, one was a star player, but they had a tournament right at the final exam in Texas. I went and talked to my boss, and he said it was okay, because he had a girl also on the tennis team. He said it was okay to give the final, but when I gave him the final exam a few days earlier, I said, now listen, if you revealed anything on this exam to your classmates, it could hurt your grade. It would hurt your grade. And they, oh, we won't. As far as I know, they didn't, because I'm grading on a curve. So it would greatly hurt your score. But anyway, leaving that, that's the one time I've given a final exam out of sync. But the final exam, according to state law, must be given at 8:30 Wednesday morning. Miss it, and all I can do is give you a 0. 8:30 to 10:30. We have 2 hours that day, 8:30 to 10:30. And during that time, if you need to, you can take makeups. That's on the syllabus. Bring a green Scantron, and that's all you need. A green Scantron, and let me know if you want to take a makeup. And oh yeah, again, I feel like I'm talking to cars. Some of you have not turned in your papers. Folk, that knocks 2 letters off your grade. And folk, I feel like I've been really, really generous and lenient with grading. And most students who have turned their papers in have got A's on them or B's at the lowest. It's an easy way to get a high grade, and some persons need it.
When did you post the grades?
Oh, they were posted last week, Wednesday, I believe, 5 days ago. They are posted, and you can. So several of you have looked at your grades, so you can look at them. Yes. I can tell who's looked at them and who hasn't, but several of you have looked at your grades, but they were posted. So you can go, and I really want you, I'm not going to put your grades for the paper on iCollege. I want you. Now, if you want to know what your grade will be, folk, I mean, I'm going to give an example here of the way I grade. Now, this is purely an example from, well, all right, the test. I mean, this person I'm looking at has a test grades. All right, 76, 75, 80, 91. Okay. Now this person did not take the 5th test. Doesn't have to. All right. Divide that by 4. That rounds up to 1. Okay. Hopefully all of you know what I did. All right. That's the, okay. I had a math teacher one time tell me he did not allow students in his class who could not compute your average. That's your test average, 80. You put that down 4 times. Put the paper grade, and I'm going to imagine one. Put your paper grade down twice. Now put your pass average 1 time. And then your final exam grade down 2 times. Add all these up and divide by 9. 9 into whatever this comes out to be, and I can pretty well tell you it's going to come out to be somewhere in the 80s. That is this person's grade. Got it? Your test average 4 times, paper average twice, final exam twice, pass once. The law requires a pass count 5%. Well, in my case, I'm counting the pass. Most of you did really well on the pass.
Is the pass or quiz?
No, the pass is those 3 little quizzes I gave you, and I call them pass. The second was a map. The first one was, forgotten already. The last one was cause and effect. The second was a map, and I've forgotten what the other. By all means, you can make it up on Wednesday. Yes, you missed the pass, you can make it up on Wednesday. When I come to class Wednesday, I'll make sure I have one for you. Which one did you miss? The third. Okay. All right. I'm glad to know that. I'll make sure I bring a pass in on Wednesday.
Can we retake any of them if we wanted to, or
no? No, here's simply, if I let you, it happens to everybody. And this is what a lot of students don't realize. And I had our former department head, Barbara Brown, by name, say that she gets 400 students coming to her every semester wanting her to bend the rules just for them. And sometimes we have to. And most of the time we just have to say no, but can we take a test again? I've done poorly on it. I simply have to say no. All right, but anyway, this is how your grades are averaged, so you can figure out, and your grades, if you've forgotten what grade you made, hey, folk, again, you know, all of you know, they're on iCollege. Okay, leaving that, half the test will be half of the test will be chapters 12 and 13. I do want to make some special commendation, though, to a couple of students. I wish I could raise your grade, but the law doesn't allow it, who have never missed a class or missed only once. David Sears, Richard Maramba, and that's it. Yeah, that's it. Persons who have answered roll call either every time or only missed once. Oh, yeah, that's what, just David and Richard. Sherry Wynn only missed twice. Again, I wish I could raise your grade for that, but I've been told the law does not allow it, folks. But at least I want to make sure that I appreciate it.
So with the test average, if you take 5 tests, you have
I only average a top 4.
Okay.
So like, yeah, if you take 5 tests, I would throw this one out, average up these 4, and folks, if you do the math, throwing this one out can really help your grade. Because this person looks like it's on their way to a borderline average, which well, it's not borderline, but yeah, okay, I didn't put the numbers down there I thought I had, but now, folks, again, when it comes to grade time, and that will be something I'll be facing in about 50 hours or so. There's going to be 2 or 3 of you, maybe 4 or 5 with a borderline grade. 89, 79, 69. Now if it's 59, I'll admit, I'll budget. But the others, I have to give you a grade. I can't bump it up. All right. All right, anyway, leaving that. And there's a bad thing about the final exam. And I know it's unfair, and I hate it too. There's no way I can give you a Scantron back and have you check it. Simply, I can't do it. So it's just simply you have to take my word for it. If the Scantron machine did you wrong, but really, I'll tell you what, it won't. Well, if the Scantron machine looks really, really bad, I'll double check it. I mean, if it looks like something's really bad going on. Otherwise. 1 or 2 questions will not likely affect your grade, even 4, 5, or 6 questions doesn't affect your grade that much. All right, well, I better leave that and go on to review, unless somebody has any other issues. All right, yes. 78, I believe. That way they'll count 2/3 of a point apiece. In other words, you miss 3 and get 2 points taken off. Wait, no, it missed 2 and I get 3 points taken off. I've got to make sure my math is not.
For the paper, I just looked on Trinidad.com. Is there a way for me to see, like, did you make like notes about the paper?
I wrote comments on every paper.
Okay.
That's why I really want you to look at it. Because I will tell you something, my writing, I had problems with my writing. I mean, I'm not going to say I was a star student. I mean, that's one reason probably why I only have an MA and not a PhD. But my writing had problems, but I learned a lot. And like the typical engineer, I can say, truthfully, I wish I had paid more attention to English. But I learned a lot from my history teachers who corrected my papers. I would read the comments carefully. And now I'm married to a copy editor, and that helps a lot in my writing because I'm doing some writing. And anyway, all right, leaving that. But, so I really believe that my comments will benefit you. All right. What you need to know for the final exam. I talked about, all right, 3 ways the Germans tried. Compurgation, ordeal, and wergeld. Know what those terms mean, folk. Ordeal, wergeld, compurgation. I talked about them. They should be in your notes. They are in the book.
Can you repeat those again? Sorry.
What's that?
Can you repeat those again?
Compurgation, ordeal, wergeld. They were three ways that the Germans tried their people who were accused of crimes. I'm not going to tell you what they mean, but you can look up, because the less I tell you, the more time I'll have to go over. The four popes, there are four outstanding popes. Gregory the Great, Innocent the Third, Pope Urban, and Pope Leo. Urban, I believe it was Urban the Second. Urban and Leo know what they did. And I talked about two types of cathedrals, the Gothic and the Romanesque. Make sure you know the difference. Again, I spent some time going over these. You should have them on your notes. If not, the answers are to be found online from a lecture I gave a few days ago. So again, the less I give out now, the more I have time to go over what's on the test. Now, then we go back to Greece. Actually go back to religion for these people. When I talk about the Olympian deities, what nation am I talking about? Who worshiped the Olympian gods? Who lived on Mount Olympus? Anybody know whose gods lived on Mount Olympus? Greece and Rome. Zeus, Ares, Mars, Poseidon, Jupiter. He was called Jupiter by the Romans, Zeus by the Greeks, the Olympian deities. All right, now Zoroaster. Zoroaster is associated with what country? Making a lot of news today, but we know it by a different name. Zoroaster is associated with Persia, which today we call Iran. Persia, Iran. Again, making big news today. Confucius, associated with what country? You make me feel like I've spent the whole semester teaching nothing. Confucius, China. One of you knew that. Confucius, associated with China. And Taoism, associated also with what country? China. All right. Cuneiform. What country used cuneiform writing? Who? Cuneiform was used by, you could say, Sumer or Babylon, and it was the Middle East, as opposed to hieroglyphics, which was used by the Egyptians. And I know August has been a long time ago, but all right. The scholastics, I mentioned that last time. Their favorite person, their favorite topic of study among the scholastics was, anybody remember what I said about the scholastics? All right. The purpose of the scholastics was to reconcile faith with reason. Their favorite person was an ancient Greek philosopher named Aristotle. Yeah, they tried to reconcile faith and reason, folks. I mean, a lot of times science will seem to come into conflict with theology, and this has been true of every religion sooner or later, including Christianity, I must say. My take on that, again, is that science, what is science this generation, will be considered anathema the next. I mean, I'm old enough to have seen a lot of what we thought about science has changed. One thing in particular, well, we used to treat ulcers, we treated ulcers as a condition of the mind, correct? Then we found out that ulcers are caused by bacteria and can be treated by antibiotics. And at first, when the first doctor proposed that, nobody believed him. But finally, the doctors came around and said, oh yeah, ulcers is caused by germs and can be treated by antibiotics. That's one thing that's changed. But in the field of evolution, everything that Darwin taught has been disproven over and over again. And today, a lot of evolutionists will secretly admit there's really no way to prove what they believe, but they believe it anyway. Now, again, all of you, hopefully, I've repeated this many times, the big famine in the early 1300s was caused by what? What's that? Now, that was part of the problem, but the famine, what caused it? Climate change. And the change was a cooling down. The climate cooled down. Now, right today, our 120 or so world leaders are meeting to try to make sure we don't overheat the planet. And I've got to say, I think they're nuts. I'm not supposed to say that, but I have to say it. The hotter life gets, the better it gets. And one time the whole world had a uniform tropical climate. It was during the Cretaceous period. And life on Earth was never better. This was the age of the 300-foot redwood trees. This was the age of the dinosaurs. The Cretaceous, C-R-E-A-T-E-O-U-S. Look it up. And that was when they, even Antarctica had tropical plants and animals growing in Antarctica. There was no ice, no snow, no frost. The climate was hot, really hot, and life was never, ever better. This, I mean, folks, you can look up with a little bit of research. And what we're living in is an ice age that really should warm up. But what I'm afraid is going to happen is after all this talk about global warming, and more than one sun predicted this, the sun appears to be getting ready to cool down. The last time it cooled was in the 1680s, and it cooled when the sunspot cycle got lower than they expected. Being an amateur radio operator, I know a little bit about sunspots. The sunspots go up and down every 13 years. But this particular cycle, they're getting lower than we predicted, and that supposedly happened in the late 1600s. Sunspots were discovered in 1610 by Galileo. Unfortunately, our records about what happened in the 1680s of the sun are not as good as we'd like them to be, but if it repeats itself, we're in for another ice age. As the sun cools down. A part of me would like to see it happen just so I could kind of say, ha, ha, ha. But anyway, let's see. All right, the Chinese believed that if two things are in balance, they called them the yin and yang. All right. Sherry learned something this semester. Anyway, the rest of you didn't. All right, let's see. The most famous slave rebellion in the Roman times was led by a slave named, there have been movies made about it, books written about it. The most famous slave rebellion was led by a slave named Spartacus. Think of the city of Sparta, Spartacus.